Start the recording. And good evening, everyone, and welcome to week 8 for Coping with the Crisis. Our presenter this evening is Dr. Ted, Ted Wilson, who's been involved in this community and throughout the state and working with individuals, couples, and families for a very comprehensive career. We're fortunate to have him here with us this evening. He is a psychologist, and he's going to be talking to us about coping with the crisis within the family context. And so, without further ado, Ted, you're on.
Okay, all right. So I thought tonight I would discuss communication in the family because it is our interest to be connected with those people with whom we live and those people in our family, however we view to constitute that, at a distance now, either through Zoom or FaceTime or other variety of media. And communication at its best is difficult. It looks like everybody here has enjoyed enough of life to know how difficult communication can be at one point or another. But there are several things that sort of come to my mind with regard to things that make communication somewhat more difficult. And if we take a look and we think about them, maybe we can figure out better ways to do that. One is that there's a multi-generational communication process in a lot of our families, not all of our families, but in a lot of our families. So that means that we communicate from the perspective of being a little bit older and wiser to the people that are sort of active and engaged and working, and maybe we'll call them active middle-agers. And then maybe we in our family have some young adults, and maybe there's an adolescent or two, and maybe some children that are now our grandchildren or other children that are part of our family. Each generation has its own sense of the world, which seems obvious. But each generation also has certain things about it that create sometimes difficulties for us to communicate and communicate effectively. So that's one thing I want to talk about. The other thing I want to talk about are the emotional overlays. In this particular period of time that we live in, and in our isolation, all of our emotions, and this is something that others have talked about over the past few weeks, but all of our emotions and all of our thoughts and everything is sort of captured in an echo chamber. And it's difficult to get away from that, or to tune that down, or to tune it out. People who live together and have been together, thrown together, and with very few outlets, have to deal with each other. And sometimes that's easy, and sometimes that's not. Sometimes we live alone, and therefore we feel isolated and disconnected from those people who are our support system. 2 weeks ago, I talked about conditions of anxiety and depression. One of the things that I don't feel like I stressed enough is that the isolation that we feel, the separation that we feel from our social network, is one of the stressors that pushes sometimes a low level of anxiety to be more anxiousness, and or a little level of depression. Because we don't have those social outlets, it increases it. So too with communication, and if we look at how isolated an individual is, and then attempting to reach out and communicate, they're doing so in ways that are not natural, not normal. I was telling Jeff that I attended quasi-funeral slash reception slash viewing the other day of a 93-year-old matriarch in my hometown. And it was good to see people as best you can, but with the mask. And it was good to sort of hear people's voices and be in juxtaposition to them, even as we were separate. But we've been separated, and we've been trying to be good. We've been trying to abide by the CDC guidelines and everything we've been told. And those of us, I think, here gathered, at least on the screen, fall into an age category. I'm making some assumptions, but fall into an age category where we have to be careful. We're susceptible in some ways that others are not. So these opportunities to connect are ones that are important to us, to connect, to talk to an old friend, to talk to a family member at a distance. Yet it lacks that intimacy. I'm reminded of studies that were done in the late 40s, the early 50s in Europe in foundling homes. And this is the origin of foster care, if you will. The World Health Organization, which is being somewhat maligned currently, sponsored a study of these children, these infants and toddlers who were in these foundling homes, and they discovered that a number of them were just not responding at all to the good physical care that they were receiving. And they were receiving good physical care, but that they would just lay there and be still, and some of them would just stop living. And there were various terms that were adopted in those days: infantile depression, marasmus, hospitalization, or hospitalism, I should say. What we discovered was that the touch of a human being, the proximity of a human being, is important and is vital to us at whatever age we are. We know that. But here we are, isolated and at a distance, and yet we need to communicate. And we need to find some way in our communication to have some degree of emotional intimacy with another, to touch another, be touched by another in our communication process, even if we're on a screen. The next thing I want to talk to you about is the intent and/or purpose of communication. Communication is something that we grow up and we learn how to utter sounds, and those sounds become words, and the words begin to carry meanings, and we understand what those are. And some of them are psychological constructs. Some of them are objects in our proximity. Some of them are events or behaviors. However, we also have some kind of intent in terms of communicating. From the cry of the infant or neonate to questions we might ask, statements we might make, there is an intent. There is perhaps several layers of intent. And what I'm going to suggest to you tonight is we need to be mindful of, there's the word again, mindful of, or think about what is our intent when we attempt to communicate. What's our purpose? What are we after? What do we want? What do we really want? And then what are some techniques that we can use to be able to communicate more effectively, to try to, in some way, filter out the interference in our communication process. Even with people who are very, very close to one another, husbands and wives that have been together for decades, miscommunication can occur, and it can occur rapidly, and it can cause problems, significant and or minor. And there are some things that we can think about and techniques we can use to try to avoid some of those conflicts, and to try to get to a place where communication is more clear and communication becomes something that is more satisfying. So I'm going to start with multi-generational, and I'll work my way through. My first category is the old and the wise. A lot of us here gathered might fall into that category. And so in one sense, we have a lot to share, we have a lot to offer, we have a lot to give in an interaction with another. We often are happy to let people know what we think and how we think it and why we think it, and where that came from and who said that and whatever. Because we have a store of information that's seasoned by our lifetimes and enhanced with education and enhanced with our experiences. However, we also face a problem. Sometimes we can't find the right word. Word find is not necessarily a symptom of senility. Word find is just simply we are able to capture, recall the word that we want to use. It happens. It can be symptomatic of something greater going on, but it can simply be the fact that the way our minds work, we're just unable to grab that right word, that right sentiment at this particular moment. The name of a person, the name of something we wanted to talk about or bring up or discuss. We can't find it. It's not within our ability to locate it inside ourselves. And that can generate anxiety in us. But that's normal. I will say to you, that is a normal process. Many of us have all kinds of workarounds that we do, from orthopedic kinds of problems to cardiovascular problems to respiratory problems. And so we do workarounds. We find a way to get where we want to go, to do what we want to do. It's not maybe as easy as it used to be. However, we find workarounds. And word find is also one of those issues where we can find some workarounds. Recall memory. So it's not just finding a word, but to recall something that you feel like is important in the process of a particular communication. Recall memory is most susceptible to degenerate over time, over age, whereas associative memory is not. If we rely more on associative memory, and you'll find yourself doing this, it starts with an M. It's related to this. It sounds like, and so we go through that maybe internally. Maybe some of us will say those things out loud. But associative memory works better for most people in this category than recall memory. If we push ourselves to recall, if we hold ourselves accountable to recall, sometimes we can thwart our ability to communicate and communicate effectively. Cognitive distractions. After a period of time, I had a friend who said to me, his mind is like the hard drive on his computer. It gets all cluttered. It gets too much stuff in there. It doesn't work quite as quickly, or it doesn't solve problems quite as well. Well, our hard drives are full. And so again, one of the things that we need to do is find a good workaround for this. Sometimes it's writing things down, so that as we write down, we will see a point at which we can make an association and find something that we wanted to talk about or share. And then contextual understanding. So if somebody's trying to describe something to me and I don't get it because the digital age is one that I'm struggling to totally fully understand, or some kind of a new novel experience has occurred, I'm going to understand it as is everybody else in the context of what we already know. I tell a story, a developmental story about the young child on his way to Aunt Sally's house, and the child looks out the window and the child sees these animals running through the pasture, and they have 4 legs and 2 ears and a tail, and the child says dog, because the animal at home that had 4 legs, 2 ears, and a tail was a dog. And so the mother says, no, that's not a dog. Those are horses. Ah, so now there are dogs and horse dogs. And a little further down the road, there are these animals that have 4 legs and a tail and 2 ears, and they're munching on grass, and they're a lot slower and more ponderous. And the child says horse. And the mother says, no, not horse. Those are cows. So now we have the dog, we have the horse dog, we have the cow dog. We put things in context. We arrive at Aunt Sally's, and Aunt Sally has this thing running around with 4 legs, 2 ears, and a tail, and goes meow. Well, is it a cow? Is it a horse? Is it a dog? What is it? So that's how children, that's how people learn. Well, that's how we make sense out of things. We put things in context. Something new, novel, that we've never experienced before, we put into context. All right, so those are some thoughts about the older of us. The active middle-ager is sometimes conflicted in communication because of time constraints. They have so many demands, so many places to be, so many things to do, so many people to interact with, that they don't have or take the time to sit down, communicate, ask the questions, listen. Sometimes they are way too knowledgeable and competent to communicate in a way in which they listen or in which they begin to understand. Sometimes in my field and in the medical field, our competence, our knowledge, our experience sometimes precludes us from listening, hearing, processing, taking the time, understanding. And that's a real fault for a particular age range, that they fall into that. Not everybody, not all the time, but some of the time. Impatience. They've got places to go, people to see, things to do. So again, that's a pressure. And the pressure is on them to do it, and do it now, and do it fast, and make that decision. Just tell me what you need, tell me what you want, and let's go on. Because that's the pace of life. Now, coronavirus, it changes things. Here we are. Sometimes we have more time than we know what to do with. But in the world that we knew, in terms of communication, it becomes an impediment to communicating effectively. As a young adult, they're very digital. So how many of you have, when we could go out to restaurants or go out to places, been at a table and be having a conversation with somebody at your table, and you look over at the table next to you, there are 4 people sitting around, and each of them is on their own device, communicating with somebody who may be 1,000 miles away, or down the hallway, or somewhere else, but they're not communicating to each other. Digital availability, although it is a wonderful thing, oftentimes can be extremely distracting. And I think the young adult falls into that category. So just as I said, time constraints and responsibilities for the active middle-ager, the hyperbolic nature of the young adult to go and to do and to experience and to live life and enjoy it and expend that energy and explore the things that are interest will oftentimes not allow them to slow down, pay attention, focus, listen, communicate effectively. Slang. They use a lot of slang. They have different ways of saying things. When we were adolescents, we had our own words that we used: cool, groovy, whatever it was. In your day, in my day, we had this way of saying things. So the young adult has those ways. The adolescent has those ways to communicate as well. And when you don't know it, there's not the patience to teach you or to help you understand it, nor do they have the ability to put it in context for you because they don't know your context. And that becomes an impediment. So let's roll on down to children. Children are very interesting in that they process things and think about things differently than adults do. We know that. But we oftentimes get caught up in communicating to them in a way that we think they ought to get it. Well, so there is, depending on the age of the child, and let's divide this into three categories here. So the preschooler is in what's called the pre-operational stage of development, which means that the preschooler understands things and sees things within their own frame of reference. Fantasy and reality are as much a part of the same thing as we would say is our reality. So, for instance, if a child sees a dog and it would be better to have that dog be pink, even though the dog is brown, the child will make the dog pink. And so the child will tell you the story about the pink dog that he saw that afternoon. The 3-year-old, the 4-year-old, sometimes 5-year-old. They will expand and exaggerate on things because it's fun. And that's how they think. And so there is this sort of period of time where fantasy and reality are malleable. And you think in those terms. But gradually, you get to the place where concrete reality becomes the way the child sees the world and begins to understand the world. But let me hasten to say, it's concrete. It is black and white. It is right and wrong. Kids that are in school, 6 years old, 7 years old, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, love rules. They'll make up a game, but the first part of making up the game is making up what the rules are and who can do what and when they can do it and so on and so forth. They like that structure. And that's how they think. If you start talking to a child about something that's abstract like freedom, the child can repeat a definition of freedom, but the child can't understand the abstract nature of what freedom means. So terms that are abstract, theological terms, educational terms, emotional terms, the child can repeat a definition. So you think they understand. They can use the word you think they understand, but they're thinking in very black and white terms. So when you're trying to communicate to a child, a grandchild, or a child who is a neighbor's child, You may say something, and you may think because the child knows the vocabulary you're using, they get it. I'm here to tell you, a lot of times they don't get it. They don't understand. I give you an example. So seeing things from a child's perspective is difficult, even for those of us who love our children, even for those of us who very much want to communicate effectively with our child. I remember taking my oldest son out for an outing to buy a Christmas present for his mom. And we're walking through the mall, and he's holding my hand, and he starts pulling his hand away. So being a good psychologist, I said, you need to hold my hand. This is about safety and security. And after a while, he began to pull his hand away again. So what I did was I said, okay, so let's sit here. So I sat him on a bench, and I got down appropriately. I was being perfect. And I said to him, you know, you need to hold my hand. It scares me to think that you might run away, and I would have a difficult time finding you. I said, so I need you to listen to me. And he said, I hear you, Dad, but my arm hurts. Well, his arm was up in the air. My arm was hanging down. His arm was up in the air. It didn't occur to me. Somebody might have said, okay, well, this is a disobedient child. Well, no, he wasn't being disobedient. His arm hurt. So communication with children requires that we try to understand things from their perspective. Okay, so let me roll right into what are the basics of communication. I'm going to give you three things. The first is listen. Listening. It's like location. Listen. Take the time, listen. Listen to the entire content of the message that is being delivered. Listen in such a way that you can repeat it almost verbatim. If you want to communicate effectively, listen. The second is perceiving. Perceiving is trying to discern what the emotions that underlie the content are. Is the person sad? Is the person anxious? Is the person upset? Is the person angry? Is the person scared? And what's the underlying emotion? That's the perception. And then the third is, once you've heard, once you've listened, once you've attempted to perceive the emotion, then respond. And only then respond. So often, we think that communication that occurs, you say X, I say Y. That you finish saying something, and then I can say something. So I'm actually waiting for you to finish saying what you need to say because I'm ready to say what I need to say. And I haven't heard you. I may have picked up the words that you used, but I probably haven't heard you. I haven't probably thought about, well, what's the intent of your message? Why are you saying this to me now? What is it you're trying to communicate to me? And this can be something very simple. My wife saying to me, put this on the grocery list. I can do that. That's a request for action. I get that. I can put that on the grocery list. But so what does that mean? Put that on the grocery. I mean, what are we talking about? Why? But if I ask that question, why do you want me to put that on the grocery list? It sounds like that sounds confrontive. It's just a simple question, but it sounds confrontive. So I need to think about, how do I respond? If I hear put olives on the grocery list. Again, very simple communication, but what's the message here? And not to say every little thing we need to be analytical or try to decipher. But there's frequently more to a message than just the word that you have auditorily accepted. So, 3 things: listening, perceiving, trying to discern what the emotions are. And maybe in a request for action, there's really no emotion, but being open to it. And then 3rd, making a response, closing the end of the loop. All right, now, these 3 communication devices or pieces of communication sit on top of something else that we do and need to be mindful about. And I'm going to refer to these as the core conditions. For Tom and Ted and Donna, perhaps, the core conditions really come from the work of Carl Rogers and Kharkov and Truax and Gaza and that group of people back in the 70s, 60s, 70s, in that era. But they are as applicable today, I'm going to argue, as they were then. So the first core condition is respect. Respect means that if I'm going to have a conversation with you, if I'm going to communicate with you, I need to treat you as if you have value. Respect means if I respect you, I treat you as if you are valuable. Warmth. I want you to see from me, I care about you. That, you're just not another pretty face. That there is something about you that I want to connect with. A warmth that gets projected in body language, in eye contact, in tone of voice, in body posture. It's a statement. It's not said, but it's a statement through my behavior that I'm with you and I want to be with you. 3rd, empathy. Being able to put myself in the other person's place, trying to see things from their perspective. If I'm going to effectively communicate, it's not how I would do things. It's how are you experiencing this from your point of view, from your experiences, from your lifetime, from your situation. What's life like through your eyes? What's it like to walk in your shoes? That's empathy. Not sympathy, not feeling sorry for somebody else, but being able to divorce yourself of yourself enough to put yourself in somebody else's place. The next core condition is genuineness. To be real. To be you. We talk about self-actualization, Abraham Maslow. We talk about Carl Rogers' becoming. We talk about being who you are, being true to who you are. If you like something, you like it. Don't like it because somebody else likes it. If you don't like it, you don't like it. That's being genuine. There are certain maladies that we refer to as codependency, where in order to be happy, I have to make everybody else happy around me. In order to feel good, I have to do things so that I don't create confrontation from other people. So I avoid confrontation, like the plague. But when you're genuine, you're comfortable in your own skin. You try very hard just to be you. The good, the bad, and the ugly. Just be you. Concreteness. Now, this is not the 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old. Concreteness means that you're specific about what it is that you're asking, wanting, or responding to. You try to hit the right level of the word, the right level of the request, the right level. You try to be as specific and concrete as you can. Self-disclosure. Oftentimes it's very effective when you're communicating with someone to tell a little story about an experience similar to the experience that another is having. This is not your invitation to tell war stories and to then dominate the conversation. This is your invitation to have perceived an emotion and tell a story where that emotion is the connector to the other person. That communication of that story with the emotion says, I'm being empathic with you. That's self-disclosure. Confrontation. Oftentimes, people will say that they're going to do X and they don't. I'm going to take the trash out every Sunday so that it can be picked up Monday morning. Well, I get up Monday morning and my wife says to me, Ted, you forgot to take the trash out. That's a confrontation. If I get upset about that and I say, well, I was too tired last night, then I need to say, well, wait a minute. She's just confronting me about something that I didn't do. But confrontations come with a cost. The equity in your relationship, the amount of work, the amount of goodwill, the amount of love in a relationship will allow you to spend some of that in a confrontation. Sometimes confrontations are necessary. Many times confrontations are not necessary, but sometimes they are. But there's always a cost. Never forget that. There's always a cost in a confrontation. All right, moving on. So on the heels of confrontation, there are two ways to communicate something that you feel strongly about. One is being assertive, and assertiveness comes with I statements. I think, I believe, I feel, I want, I need, I don't like, I won't, I will, I. It's always okay to assert yourself. To say, that's how you feel. That's what you want. Where do you want to go to dinner? I'd like to go to this restaurant or that restaurant. I'm dreaming now. So you assert yourself. The other side is the aggressiveness. And typically that starts with you. You this, you that, you the other, push you away when I say you. You stepped on my toes. You said this to me. You said that to me. You didn't do this. You didn't do that. You. That's aggressive. Being assertive, you can say, I was hurt when that happened. I was disappointed. That's on me. I get to say that. Those are my feelings. Those are my emotions. If I say, you hurt my feelings. Well, no. Nobody can hurt my feelings. They're my feelings. It's okay for me to say, my feelings were hurt. That's assertive. So understanding the difference between assertiveness and aggressiveness, I think, is very important. Try hard, if you want to communicate effectively with someone, to diminish or degrade or put away the aggressiveness, and to bring out the genuineness and the ability to assert yourself. All right, so rolling right along. Sometimes when we're engaged in a communication, we're not following what's going on. It's not making sense to me, to us. And the tendency is to begin to ask questions. Who, what, when, where, how, why, because you want to know. You want to know to put it in some kind of context. But every question you ask leads the communicator in a particular direction. It may have nothing to do with the communication that they want to get across, but it presumes that that data, that information, the who, the what, the where, the how, the when, is important to understand. And so you're directing then the communication. You have been listening, hopefully, but now you start asking questions and now you start directing. And you have no idea where that communication wanted to go. Now you're directing it in a particular area. The other thing is, sometimes we are given communications that are difficult to hear, painful, fear, anxiousness, despair, hurt, loss. What do you say? Many of us are tempted to make it better, to say something that will somehow fix it for the other person, because we care about the other person. We respect them. We genuinely care about them. But if we say something that is a platitude, it'll be okay. Time heals all. It's part of God's plan. We're diminishing in very dramatic ways. We're diminishing the opportunity we have to connect with another and to understand the other. Whether this is a child or an adolescent or an adult, or one of us are a little bit older. Don't feel like you have to fix things or make things better. Don't be afraid. Their pain is their pain. You're not going to catch it. And it's okay to not know. It's okay to not have an answer. It's okay to have no words. It's actually better to have no words than to have words that are platitudes. Try to not be the critical parent. Well, he should have done it that way. If he hadn't done that, then this wouldn't have happened. I told him so. Sometimes we think those things because many of us, maybe all of us, some of us, had critical parents, and that voice is still in our head. You shouldn't do that. Why did you do that? You knew the consequence. Maybe that's right. Maybe there's a truth in that. But if you say that, you have now truncated the communication. You've now given up an opportunity to be closer and more intimate with someone because it was important for you to be right. So one of the things I want for you to consider is you don't need to be right. Sometimes you can think the other person's lost their mind talking about this, that, or the other. Okay. That's on them. For you to come back and be critical then eliminates an opportunity that was there. For you to try to understand their position from their perspective. You may not agree with it. You can say that. Be genuine. Say it. You know, I disagree with you. However, I want to understand why you feel the way you do. Help me understand why you would support that person or why you would believe that to be true. That's not threatening. It's help me understand. Help me get it. All right. Let me see where I am here. Okay. So I'm going to say something I said before and that actually Tom talked about, and that is finding the right words. And again, you know, I'll speak for myself, sometimes have word find problems. But finding the right word and turning down the volume or turning up the volume can be extremely helpful in effective communication. So, if someone seems sad, I can throw out the word, it's like fishing, I throw out the word sad. What you've told me makes me think that you're feeling very sad. Now, I used very sad. The person can say, no, I'm not sad. Now, do I feel crushed because I got it wrong? No. I feel like now we're interacting. The person may say, I'm not sad, I'm just hurt. And then I say, hurt. Oh, help me understand why that was hurtful. Now we're having a conversation about something that is on track with the person that we're talking to. You don't have to have the answer. You don't have to be right. You have to be in the ballpark. You can't catch a fish unless you throw it in the water, the bait, the hook, the tackle in the water. It can be the best around, but until it goes in the water, there's nothing to catch. So you have to try. We all are good at utterances. We can make the sounds of the words and come up with things. But communication is much more sophisticated than that. But we don't think about it. It's like walking. We don't think about it. We just walk. Unless you can't. And then if you can't, then you start thinking about how you did that, because you have to learn how to do it again. All right. In this day and time, one of the things that I want to say is don't allow the medium, Zoom, to be the message. This is weird. This is at a distance. This is, if you've ever, and I think most of you have, spoken to groups, you like to get a feel for what's going on and how people are, you know, and you take the, this is different. But if we allow the medium to be the message, to be sterile, so that the message becomes sterile, if we allow our distance, our social distance, to make our communication sterile, we lose our intimacy. And we're threatened to lose our intimacy as we're at a distance. So we have to work extra specially hard to, in the process of communication, to get it, to try really hard to get it, to connect, to plug in to the other. So we're at home with the one we love, day after day after day after day after week after day. And sometimes that echo chamber of the home can intensify underlying things that go on. And out of the blue, something can happen. Now, my recommendation and this is a communication technique, is temporize. Take a time out. Take a deep breath. Say, let me get back to you on that. Give me 5 minutes. Let's talk about that after breakfast. Take some time. Temporize. It can save a lot of strife because it'll give you an opportunity to think. It'll give them an opportunity to think. It gives you time to process your own feelings and thoughts and emotions. Time. It's a good thing. So, I'm going to throw 3 things out and talk about how to address those things. Today's politics. So I have a good friend that I connect with whose politics are on the other side of the equation from mine. I love him like a brother. I think he has his head in a dark place. However, I respect him. So are there certain things that we just can't talk about? Well, maybe. But because I care, I want to know why he feels the way he does, why he thinks the way he does. I don't want to presume that he's one of them. I want to understand. So we may never talk about whether or this person is wrong or those kinds of things because there's too much static there. But what we can talk about is how we feel and what it is that connects us. What do we have in common? When Uncle Bob came over for Thanksgiving dinner and wanted to talk about the president or wanted to talk about this, that, or the other, it causes great disturbances. And you read every Thanksgiving, if you read sort of primers to Thanksgiving gatherings, you read about how to diffuse the conflict because of Uncle Bob or Aunt Sally. So don't be afraid of those communications, but rather focus on the human being, the person you care about, person you're related to, and how you can find a connection to understand the person. Confrontations. If someone starts a confrontation, you don't have to take the bait. If someone says something and it hurts your feelings, you can say, man, that hurt. You don't have to take the bait. If someone is trying to get into a conflict with you, and there are people that do that, people that we love who do that. Every Sunday I hear Jeff say, and the people that drive you crazy. Well, we have people in our lives like that. We love them. We care about them. We don't like them sometimes. So how do you avoid those confrontations? Well, they can lob that stuff in, but I don't have to take the bait. I can think to myself, that's not worth it. I don't need to. I don't need to respond to that. I don't have to say, "Isn't it nice we're having weather?" But I can communicate about where we are, what we're doing, who he is, who she is, whatever. All right. So that's a communication primer, I think. And I guess I'd like to stop there and say, do you have questions or thoughts?
Well, thanks, Ted. Anybody like to ask a question? Please raise your hand, or you can text me either using the chat feature or my cell phone. I wonder if anybody can relate to having political discussions with friends and family that differ from your particular perspective. That seems to be a common experience for many folks today. Tom, you have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I think it's really difficult. I come from South Mississippi, and all of my family are of a very different persuasion. So, you know, Ted's work about trying to understand why they feel that way is really, really important. And so that if that's in my head, I don't get into such a struggle with them about what they think or believe, either religiously in terms of fundamentalism or political fundamentalism. But it's really difficult at times, very, very difficult to stay into that perspective, Ted, of why do they believe the way they do. It's very difficult, but very useful. So thank you for that.
Well, it is difficult because a lot of what happens in a confrontation or in a confrontational communication is an enticement to set them straight, is an enticement to allow them to know your truth. And I said this earlier on tonight. If you're going to communicate effectively, you have to be less interested in being right and more interested in understanding. You can look at it this way. Most communications are either a request for action, do something, a request for information, help me know this, find this, whatever, or a request for understanding. It's those requests for understanding, sometimes embedded in a communication, that should signal us that we need to listen, and try to perceive the emotion and try to understand what drives that emotion, because it's there for a reason, and then respond.
I would just to echo a little bit of Tom's experience, I would say with my own family as well. They're family members with whom we have differences. Let's say that we have differences, political differences. And to me, you know, it's a matter of weighing what I value more at that point. And I think to your point, Ted, is do I value winning this argument, or do I value the connection? And are there other things we can connect on? And as far as I'm concerned, you know, my mother would say, you know, we fight among ourselves, but the politicians fight, and then they go out and have a drink and dinner together. It's just, you know, it's just like, why can't we just be like that? You know, just kind of let that kind of stuff go, because if we're aiming to change one another, it's one of those expectations, I think, that we're going to get disappointed on. It's going to lead to a resentment. So best to be very clear about what you can and what you can't do, and let it go from there.
Yeah, that's a good point, Ted. There are a lot of different kinds of factors that are involved in our communication within families, as we all know. The hierarchy in the family. Now, there is, I think also, and I want to hasten to say this, none of us deserve to be abused by someone else or berated by someone else because we don't think the way they do. We don't deserve that. I'm not suggesting that anybody sits still for that. But rather than become aggressive, or rather than to engage in a confrontation that just makes matters worse, assert yourself and say, you know, I just don't enjoy that kind of conversation. I'm sorry. I know it's important to you, but I can't do it. Hasten to say, I love you too much to get into that. I don't want to do that. So you're not retreating. You're standing up for yourself, but you're not engaging. And this is a lesson I learned early on in my training, is that there were a number of psychiatric patients who want to engage you in a conflict, because that's what's going on inside them. And so they're acting on you, transference, countertransference, back and forth. That's what they want. It's easy to take that bait. It's easy to try to prove them wrong. It's easy to try to trump that. No, it's just a word, trump. So, but if you do, then you lose. You lose.
Ted, I wonder if you might speak about that in the current context, though, in terms of, you know, the racial controversy and struggle that's been, you know, playing out this week. I know that a number of folks in our congregation struggle with family members who whose prejudice and racism is actually very painful for them, and they feel sometimes compelled to speak out against it, and sometimes find that can cause considerable difficulty in their interpersonal relationships. Do you have any guidance or suggestions that you might offer folks in that particular context?
Yeah. So first of all, I would say, so understand why someone might have a prejudice. And again, I'm not saying it's right, but I'm just saying understand. So if we're here, you and I put you down, in juxtaposition to you, I'm better than you. If I'm feeling bad about myself, if I'm not feeling good about where I am or who I am or what I'm doing, then one way to elevate myself is to put somebody else down. If I feel like I've lost economic, social, political, a voice, strength, power, whatever, then I'm being attacked. It's easy for people to want to find the other to be responsible or accountable or be the culprit in the process. Some of it's fear. Some of it is low social, self-emotional esteem. Some of it is identification. This is who I am. I'm a part of this group membership. It could be for any number of those reasons that people choose this path. Because they're Mississippi or I lived in Alabama for 5 years. Very nice people, but they had an identity, it wasn't uniform, but you know, there was an identity. So do I just sit by and do I allow them to say these awful things? Do I stand by and not make comment about their hateful, what I view as a hateful sentiment. No, I don't. I get to assert myself. I get to say, I don't feel that way. I don't see things that way. And if they start hurling pejorative statements towards me in terms of my inability to understand the world in real terms, well, that's their perception. And I may then have to make some decision about the degree to which I'm willing to expose myself to their pain, to their way of looking at things. But I don't need to get into a fight about it. I need to stand up for what I believe is right. It may come to a fight. We may come to a fight. But it will not be one that we look to make or create. And some of that is social science, some of that is just my opinion.
Okay, any final questions before we wrap up for tonight? All right, well, thank you, Ted. This was wonderful and a great presentation. Again, we're so blessed to have your wisdom in our midst. Next week will be our last in this series. It's the wrap-up week, and Catherine Harris and Ted Olson will be facilitating that conversation. Catherine, Ted, do you have anything you'd like to share tonight for people to ponder and think about as we prepare for next week?
Ted, do you want to read the questions?
Let me find them first.
Okay, I have them here.
You do? You have them? Then go right ahead, please.
I think what we wanted to do was basically look at what's happened and what our experience has been during these sessions, and see what kind of common threads are not only were discussed, but what some of our common experiences were as we've been through this time together. So first of all, what have you found helpful? Have there been any specific takeaways? Has anything particular surfaced for you in these sessions? Is there anything that you want to explore more intentionally? How are you preparing for re-entry? What do you anticipate is going to be happening, and what are some of your own concerns and your own thoughts about this? Finally, what resources do you need to continue taking care of yourself? And how do you empower yourself in the midst of the powerlessness that can so easily be felt in these times? And this includes not only COVID-19 at this point, but all of the recent events that have been happening that have certainly been fed by the tensions that have been built up in the last 3 months or so. So we would basically like for you to do some reflection and to come and share your thoughts so we can see how we can continue to all be supportive of each other. Ted, what would you add?
I just simply would add that, this whole process over the last several weeks has been a discrete experience. There's been a beginning, a middle, and an ending. And now as we're going away from this, I think it's always a good opportunity to do kind of what we're suggesting is to just reflect a little bit on what do we want to take away, what threads were tied together, what threads were pulled out, what loose threads remain. So that might be a way to kind of frame it. I'm all threaded out.
Okay. Well, I think that's a great place to end. I pray all of you stay safe and stay well, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you for joining us this evening, and we'll look forward to seeing you then. God bless and have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.